Hi everybody, this is the second part of our Oligochaeta notes. I'm going to pick up where we left off at the end of video 1. Just a quick little disclaimer here. I might actually need a third video because I'm only allowed to record in 15-minute segments. So there might be a third one to do reproduction at the end. So we left off talking about the pathway of food that it goes through the worm. And we looked at this little blue flow chart that I have created for you. And what we are going to do is take a look at it in our picture where we left off yesterday. So the worm, if you follow the arrow, the worm is going to eat food. It's going to enter the mouth. The mouth, it will lead to a muscular pharynx. And from the pharynx, it kind of narrows a little bit into the esophagus. And remember, the esophagus is caged by the aortic arches of the circulatory system. From the esophagus, it's going to go into a storage tank. It is going to look gray and it's kind of squishy. You're able to touch it with your probe and it's very movable. So it is not a firm structure at all. Then it goes to the gizzard, and this is where we left off yesterday. The gizzard is about the same size as the crop, but the gizzard is going to grind the food. It might seem kind of silly that the earthworm has to grind dirt. It almost seems as if the dirt's going to be tiny enough, but it's kind of like for those of you who chew ice cream or chew pudding or yogurt or something. It's a process that has to happen. And it also mechanically mixes digestive acids with the dirt and sediment that they're eating. So the crop's going to be the storage tank so that the gizzard and the intestine don't get overloaded, and the gizzard is going to be the grinder. It's going to kind of mix the food and make it smaller particles for the organism. And then you have a very, very, very long intestine that follows down and is very repetitive. It punctures through every septum. Remember those little connective tissue walls internally that we saw. And it's going to eventually end at the rectum where it narrows a little bit, and then the anus. One thing I want to point you to, there are a couple extra structures that are found. First of all, if you look at the cross section, the intestine is not actually like an opening of a straw. If you were to envision a straw and cut it in half, you see that you have a nice big opening. The intestine of the earthworm actually has a depression right here, this little indent called the typhlosol. And what that's going to do is increase surface area for absorption. As the food travels down the length of the intestine, it's kind of a race, and the worm wants to absorb as much nutrient as possible. And so having this indent, this depression, actually gives a significant added amount of surface area that it can absorb through the nutrients through. So in your own intestine, you might have heard that you have these finger-like projections called microvilli. We can thank the worm for the typhlosol because that's kind of the precursor to our microvilli. The other two structures that I want to talk about, but you really aren't going to see in a picture, they are listed in our blue flow chart on the previous screen. You're going to have calciferous glands lining on either side of the esophagus. One thing you have to remember about the worm is that they are vulnerable organisms. Whatever we put on our dirt, whether acid rain comes down through rainwater, fertilizers, pesticides, anything like that that we put on our lawn or garden, they're going to be affected by that. So they kind of have two safety features in place. First of all, lining the esophagus, they are going to have calciferous glands there, and they are going to be regulating acid-base balance, calcium ion concentration, and things like that. Then around the intestine, actually lining the intestine, the organism is going to have chlorogogan cells or chlorogogan tissue, and that's going to act as their liver. Your liver and their liver kind of have a similar function in that it's going to detoxify substances. Anything that we put into our body or the worm puts into their body, they are going to detoxify. A lot of nitrogens are going to be found in fertilizers and pesticides. And some of those nitrogens in certain forms, even naturally occurring, are not going to be healthy forms of nitrogen. So they are going to be able to help out with nitrogen metabolism and kind of convert those nitrogen into kind of more user-friendly nitrogen products. So the chlorogogan cells are going to act as the liver, detoxify, and undergo nitrogen metabolism. So those are two special tissues that are found as part of the digestive tract. Here are two different views that you can see. So this is if you were to cut the worm kind of lengthwise, you see that you have the mouth. Here's your muscular pharynx, the esophagus. You have the crop, which is kind of squishy because it expands. You have the gizzard, which is kind of more firm, and that's going to be the grinder. And then you have the straight shot intestine all the way down. Here you can take a look. Here, these black bands, they kind of look like staples, are the aortic arches that are going to be found surrounding that esophagus. And that leads us to our circulatory system. They do have a closed circulatory system. They are going to need direct delivery of oxygen and nutrients. So they are going to have a dorsal blood vessel, a ventral blood vessel, and then they're going to have capillaries, branches coming off of the dorsal and ventral blood vessel in every single segment. So if we take a look, the circulatory system in this picture is highlighted in red. So remember, the dorsal is the top, darker surface. It's where the clitellum is thicker, and the ventral is kind of its belly surface, that's the bottom, and it's going to be lighter in color, and the clitellum is not as thick. So you have the dorsal blood vessel. If you follow my arrow, you have the dorsal blood vessel that's on top. You have the ventral blood vessel that's on the bottom, and you can see in every single segment, this organism is going to have branches or capillaries. So the ventral blood vessel will serve as the aorta. It will return blood to the body's tissues, and the dorsal blood vessel is going to collect that deoxygenated blood and bring it back up this way, anterior, to your aortic arches, and you have 5 pairs. So you can see here, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Sometimes in certain documents and websites, you'll see them just be called hearts, and they are going to maintain steady blood pressure. And so you have those capillaries in every segment in order to drain deoxygenated blood from the worm and then also to deliver oxygenated blood to every single segment. And it's what allows for gas exchange. Here's a little diagram showing you blood flow through the heart. And just so you know, if you step on a worm, you're not going to see bright red blood. You're going to see it's colorless. It's consisting of amoeboid cells and some hemoglobin as well, but it is going to be colorless. There's no red in color. Respiration, and this links us back to our extra credit that I'm offering to you. They actually have no respiratory system, which would kind of make you think that you're taking a step back. They just have kind of found a backdoor away from being able to undergo respiration. Gas exchange for them is actually going to occur across their skin, and that is why they have to stay moist. That's why on a warm, sunny day, you're going to find them on the sidewalk kind of struggling or shriveled up sometimes if you're too late, and that's why we're saving them. By having a moist skin, the atmospheric oxygen is able to dissolve in, and they're small enough, they're able to move and contract and be able to distribute that oxygen to the rest of the body. Earthworms, certain ones, are not going to be able to be fully immersed in water. They actually can drown because they are not able to extract dissolved oxygen that's in water. So they're not able to have too much water, and they can't have too little water. So the cuticle is thin enough. They have a cuticle outer layer of protection on the outside that we have not talked about yet. That's thin enough to allow this diffusion. So the number one rule of thumb is earthworms have to stay moist. So on wet, overcast, cloudy days, they will be kind of up closer to the surface because it's moist out. On drier, more humid summer days, they are going to be deeper in the surface of the earth because it's cooler down there, and there's also more moisture located in that area. For their excretory system, they are going to have 2 metanephridia per segment. So we saw that in our polychaetes as well. You can see here it is kind of a really convoluted system. It is a very extensive tubule network, that gives great distance so that they are able to filter. They're going to keep what they need. They're going to keep water. They're going to keep certain ions. And right here through this little pore on the outside, in every segment, they have an opening or a pore. Two actually. Since they have two metanephridia per segment, one kind of you can see here on the right side, one kind of on the left side. Each of those extensive metanephridia tubule systems will have an exit per segment. So if you have 50 metanephridia per, if you have a 50 segmented worm, you're going to have 100 metanephridia total. You will have 100 nephridia pores to be able to get rid of the waste product in each segment on the right side and the left side of each of those segments. For their nervous system, they do have a brain. Their brain is called the cerebral ganglia. They actually have two, one on the right side, one on the left side, and they are going to function in directing movement of the body. They're very receptive to touch and light. Bright light to them is danger, and so they're going to be very, very sensitive to that. We'll see that in a couple slides from now. Their brain has to go around the esophagus. So their brain is dorsally located, and then they're going to have a pair of connectives. They're called circumpharyngeal connectives, which you do not need to know. But here's their brain, and then here are those connectives. One wraps around the right side, and one wraps around the left side of the esophagus. And then that leads you to a ventral nerve cord. The ventral nerve cord is going to run along the bottom surface or ventral surface of the body. And in each segment, you see here, they kind of have a little enlarged area, just like what we saw in the polychaetes. Now, what's special about this is the first ventral ganglia that you see right here that I'm pointing to, that is going to be very important in helping the worm eat and burrow. So eating and burrowing are two kind of vital instincts that the earthworm needs. And if you remove, they've experimented, and if you remove the first ventral ganglia right there, the earthworm is not able to eat or burrow. So that's a significant ventral ganglia. They do have giant axons. We were first introduced to the giant axon in our cephalopod chapter, and it is what gave them great escape mechanisms. So they too have a giant axon. We have not lost that structure. It's going to be wider in diameter and allows them to send signals a lot faster. So it gives them rapid escape movements like we saw in the cephalopods. And it enables them to simultaneously contract many segments at the same exact time. So if they sense vibration, a bird kind of pecking from above ground, a lawnmower, anything like that, touch, light sensitivity, they are able to kick it into gear and move very, very fast. They do have neurosecretory cells, kind of like hormones, and since they are hermaphrodites, which we will learn about in a few minutes, they are going to be able to use their neurosecretory cells in order to establish when are they going to act as the male and release the sperm, and when are they going to act as the female and release the egg. Sense organs. Even though they are not overly cephalized, they do have a lot of sense organs that are located all over the body. Now, they do not have eyes, but they have lots of photoreceptors. So the earthworm can stay away from bright light. Bright light to them is going to equal death in a way. If you think about it, out on hot, sunny days on the concrete, it gets very hot. It dries up the moisture that might have been there earlier. And the earthworm is very sensitive to that bright light. And it knows it has to find shelter, it has to find shade, it has to get underground. So that is why it's going to be very, very negatively attracted to bright light. It is attracted to weak light. So overcast, cloudy days, especially if it's damp outside, moist, they'll be out and about, they'll be above ground or closer to the surface of the ground. They are sensitive to chemicals. They are sensitive to texture, acidity, and calcium, so they can take it into their mouth, taste test it a little bit, and then spit it out. And they are also, like we said before, very sensitive to mechanical stimulation. So strong vibrations, a bird pecking from above ground, lawnmower, people walking, they are sensitive to that, and they will be able to use their giant axons in order to burrow very, very quickly. Now that is where I'm going to end part 2, and then part 3 will be a little bit shorter and it will just focus on reproduction.